card, and they always resort back to this promise of, ye shall be as gods.
The angels, the sons of God, resemble who we call in ufology the Nordics or the Pleiadians, who are these beings who very much look like us. The misconception is that the fallen angels have a different appearance than the good angels. The bad guys look different than the good guys. The good guys are these beautiful angelic beings, and the fallen angels are these grotesque, demonic-looking entities with horns, and they're the typical Hollywood depictions of demons. But that's ludicrous. That is completely illogical. These entities, these beings, hail from the same race. Every time that human beings encounter angelic beings within the biblical narrative, the description of the angels is always the same. They look like men. Indeed, Paul says that it's possible to entertain angels unawares, which means that you can confuse them for human beings. They're not human beings. They are, in fact, an extraterrestrial, non-human race, a pre-existent extraterrestrial, non-human race. But they are also sons of God, just like Adam was a son of God. And so it makes sense, therefore, that all the sons in the family bear the same semblance. They look the same, and they resemble their father. And it is my contention that both mankind and the elder race, the human race and the elder race, bear the image of God. There is no scripture in the Bible anywhere that states that mankind is the exclusive bearer of God's image. Rather, it just says that we were made in the image and likeness of the Elohim. And so we look like them because they are our elder siblings. We are reproductively compatible with them. So we are very similar, even physiologically, although they are of a higher nature. And so then the question is, what do they look like? And I think the answer is apparent within the canonized text of Scripture. They look like us, but with some differences. And we know that there has to be some differences because Lot was able to recognize them when they were approaching the city of Sodom. Lot saw two angels approaching and instantly was able to recognize that these were sons of God, emissaries from the kingdom of heaven. Now, how could he have recognized these angels? Because they looked human enough to where they could pass through town and be taken as exotic human beings, but they had distinctive trademarks, hallmarks, that were calling cards that they were not human beings and that they were indeed angels.
This was something that we heard about and then we investigated during research for the book Exo Vaticana, which ultimately led us to the top of Mount Graham in Arizona. We were curious why. When the Vatican's Advanced Technology Telescope and the Large Binocular Telescope were being built, why did the indigenous peoples of Arizona, especially the San Carlos Apaches, why did they join environmentalists in filing dozens of lawsuits before a federal appeals court to try to stop the construction of the observations on Mount Graham? The project ultimately prevailed in favor of the Vatican and NASA after an act by the United States Congress ordered it to be done. But the question remained in our mind, why had the tribal communities fought so diligently against the construction of telescopes atop that mountain? Now, I had wrongly assumed that this was because Mount Graham was a sacred place, as in preceding generations of Native Americans had lived and died on it, and therefore it was considered holy ground, something like a graveyard. But I learned later that while that was partially true, it really wasn't the big issue. The real dispute surrounded how Mount Graham is considered one of the four holiest mountains in the world for the Apache and is considered sacred to all of the region's native peoples, and it is so because it is what we might call a stargate. In their mythos, a portal through which the star people have come since the dawn of time. And once we understood that fact, our suspicions as to why the Vatican and NASA had chosen that mountain in particular, even being willing to face a prolonged legal battle to build these telescopes on Mount Graham, including the largest binocular telescope in the world where the Lucifer device is kept, why would they have gone to all of that trouble? Why not just go to another mountain range and find basically the same height, the same environmental conditions? Why did it have to be that mountain? Now, we came to learn another thing, and that is that the San Carlos Apache have these preserved ancient tales concerning Mount Graham and that geography, including stories very similar to biblical chronology. These legends involve a creator, a deceiving dragon that follows, an epic flood, and even a race of giants known as the Jindupids, who were judged and destroyed by God. According to the legend, a race of Indians called the Tartans lived in the valley between Tucson and Phoenix. These were just peaceful farmers, and they prospered until one day they were invaded by the Jindupids, described as Goliaths, who were so huge they used tree limbs for toothpicks. Well, these Nephilim were led by this massive man they call Evilken, who allegedly came from the northeast and were headed south to their home beyond the Gulf of Baja. These giants nearly wiped out the Tartans before they ran and hid themselves underground and in the mountains and prayed to Father Sun, who then threw this huge fireball that came down to the earth, seared the monstrous Nephilim into the scorched mountain rock, and wiped them out. Now, elements of that tale are obviously mythological, but it has a remarkable thematic coherence with Genesis chapter 6. The Apache creation myth is also interesting in this regard, as a particular version involves what they call the one who lives above, who descended down over the mountain in a flying disc at the start of creation. Their myth begins, in the beginning, nothing existed. No earth, no sky, no sun, no moon, only darkness was everywhere. And then the legend starts, before noting that suddenly from the darkness emerged a disc. One side of it was yellow, the other side of it was white. It appeared suspended in midair. And within the disc sat a bearded man, the creator, the one who lives above. Now, besides this creator who rides in a heavenly disc, there's a dragon with the power of speech that turns up, bargaining with mankind, as well as supernatural gateways associated with mountains through which spirit beings have and can come. So suffice it to say that these ancient native ideas involving flying discs, flying creators, spirit guides, even owls and a talking dragon or a great serpent, and supernatural gateways tied to mountain ranges. This is something that began long before the Vatican cast its eyes on Mount Graham. Think how much these legends mirror what the Bible teaches, including the idea that mountaintops or high towers were often depicted as places where doorways into the supernatural could be opened. For instance, Nimrod of biblical fame sets out to build a tower whose top will reach into heaven, Genesis 11:4 says. This was the infamous Tower of Babel, and Nimrod was designing it so that the top of it would extend into Shamayim, heaven, the dwelling place of God. The Jewish Encyclopedia confirms several historical records that Nimrod, who it establishes was also identified by various ancient cultures as Osiris, Orion, Apollo, Gilgamesh, that he had built the Tower of Babel specifically to to ascend into the presence of God, into the presence of Jehovah himself. And of course, God came down and said of the tower's design that nothing would be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do, Genesis 11:6. So in other words, according to the Lord himself, Nimrod would have accomplished what he imagined to do, and that is to build a tower whose top would reach into the abode of God. Even the name Babylon implies that, echoing the North and South American Indian beliefs about towering gateways and the meaning gate of God or gateway to God. Now, that there could be sacred locations where those beings that can see into the supernatural realm could literally walk onto a high place and enter heaven is really not as far-fetched as it sounds. There are numerous records, including in the Bible, that appear to substantiate the idea that heaven can be attained on high towers or mountainous locations. So think about Moses meeting with God on Sinai, Jesus returning atop the Mount of Olives, the 200 watchers that descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon, and other examples, including Jacob's Ladder.
Okay, well, Admiral Byrd has a nephew named Harvey Byrd. Harvey Byrd did the foreword for the book Stranger at the Pentagon, who happens to be about an alien named called Valiant Thor who came to Earth. From 1957, there was a spacecraft that landed not too far from the Pentagon, about 14 miles away. Police showed up at the scene. There was a man standing there, and basically they escorted him over